I'm Dr. Jean Sherman, founder and director of Sky, the Sherman Centre for Culture and Ideas. Sky takes you to London, where we sit down with fashion and textile designer Dame Zandra Rhodes, DBE, and artist, jewellery maker and portraitist Andrew Logan. In 2019, together with Dola Merrilees, I was fortunate to see the Zandra Rhodes exhibition during installation whilst visiting the Fashion and Textile Museum. The museum was founded by Rhodes in 2003. Dame Zandra Rhodes' early education in textile design shaped her label, earning her an international reputation and roll call of clients, including Diana, Princess of Wales. Her designs are often inspired by travel and include motifs from the Ukraine, from India, Australia, Japan, and from the symbolic traditions of the indigenous people of North America. Dame Zandra is joined by her long-standing friend and collaborator, Andrew Logan, who trained as an architect at the Oxford School of Architecture. During the 1970s and 80s, both the work and social scene created by Logan influenced multiple underground cultural figures, including filmmaker Derek Jarman. In 1972, Logan founded the Alternative Miss World pageant. The competition was and remains open to men, women, people of all ages, sexual orientations, and racial backgrounds. Similar to Sky's curatorial vision, which seeks to link fashion to other forms of cultural expression, the creative worlds of both Rhodes and Logan operate far beyond the confines of their respective disciplines. An interest in music, in contemporary art, and in film is intrinsic in their trajectories. We are enormously grateful to Diana Edmonds, whose ideas initiated this discussion. Sky is delighted to return to the UK ahead of the Foundation's London 2021 Hub, which will be hosted in partnership with London's Design Museum. Sky is proud to bring this episode and others to you during a time of closed borders and travel restrictions. Dame Zandra Rhodes, DBE, and Andrew Logan now join our London correspondent and global emissary Dola Merrilees, author, curator, cultural consultant, and treasured Sky collaborator. Thank you for joining us.
A warm welcome to you both, and Zandra, thank you so much for opening this wonderful home of yours to us. So I thought I wanted to start off by asking you about your long-standing friendship, and I think at one point you actually lived together in your home in Notting Hill. And
not quite.
There was a fire, I think.
It was.
You're
right, yes.
Andrew had a terrible destructive fire.
Yes, 79 it was.
I wasn't using the unfinished top of my house in Notting Hill Gate.
That's right.
And so he'd come over, and that's when he started to do all of the wonderful sculptural
The
heads,
portraits, yes.
Including the one of me
Yes,
that you'll
that
be able
was-
to see a bit later.
Yes.
And how did you first meet?
Through our great friend Dougie Fields, the painter.
Yes,
Who introduced us and first of all took me to Andrew's first Alternative Miss World show, and then our friendship just sort of built up without us knowing it, I think.
Yes, that's how friendships are, aren't they? There's been a very firm friendship for all our lives since
I think
then.
it's linked very much to Andrew's work, which I think is very exciting. And I've been lucky enough to be involved in making his women's half of the costumes for the Alternative Miss World.
Side.
And we've done sketching trips together. And I introduced you first to India.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because travelling, as you know, is a great maker or breaker of relationships. And you've travelled extensively together, not just to India. But I did want to ask, what drew you both to India? And I mean, Zandra, in your case, your affinity even led you to be on the TV series The Real Marigold Hotel. What was that like?
I wasn't going to resist that because I knew that I'd have a lovely time. But I was originally, when India first decided to open up properly across the world and do their festivals of India, they chose the UK. And this amazing friend of who's now a close friend of Andrew and myself, Rajiv Sethi, and his mentor, a wonderful lady called Pupil Jayaka, decided to have me to represent India, and they invited me to India, and I was taken all around to factories and wherever they made things. I wasn't, no beaches or sun. I went to all the factories, but it was marvellous. And then a bit later, Kerry Packer took me on invited me to come to Australia, and it was a wonderful trip, and I was asked to bring someone, and I brought Andrew. So we went first to Australia and then back to India, and that's really Andrew's introduction to India.
I mean, talking about that Australian connection, I know that both of you worked with the Australian photographer Robin Beach, and I think she first travelled and met you in India, Andrew. The National Gallery of Australia holds a number of her works, a number of her portraits, and you collaborated on those works. Can you tell us a bit about that relationship and also how India has influenced your practice, Andrew?
Goodness, well, first of all, going to India was like going home for me. I mean, the colour, everything about it, the visual delights, the terrible delights as well, but everything was... and Robin, in fact, I first met her through Grant, she was the Grant's assistant, and Grant was going out with Sandra at that time. And that was the time of Goldfields, 1976. Grant
Mumford,
of course.
Who now, I think he now does his photography in California.
Yes.
But I travelled to quite a lot of the world with him as well. But in fact, Robin, at that time, was his assistant.
That's
then
correct.
She came to London.
Yes.
And really, gradually our friendships all took over, which is friendships and work, and Robin did wonderful posters of my work, which are all recorded in...
Well, she recorded so much of your work. She basically took on yourself and myself and recorded us while she was in London, and Carol McNichol. I think those are the three people that she documented the whole work. Anything that was happening, she would be there photographing it.
She was amazing.
She was amazing person. And completely selfless. I mean, it was just, she was a joy. I mean,
And you said for you, going to India was like going home.
Yes, very much so. Well, it was all in my vocabulary, and the spiritual side of it was so strong, and of course, I talk about my work very much as a physical manifestation of the spiritual. That's what my work's about, basically, joy. And so there was India, there was all this, It was. I was so comfortable there.
You felt quite normal.
Yes, quite normal. And it sort of took and then I did a year's work when I came with Sandra, and created the Goddesses exhibition, which was shown at the Commonwealth Institute. And one of the pieces being a huge...
It's me as a wobbly doll.
The wobbly doll, the Rajesh Sandra, which means spirit of movement. I always remember Sandra because when she first saw it, she went up and looked up her skirt. I always remember that. And it was a joy. I mean, it was thanks to Sandra. But then Sandra's introduced us to many people. I mean, our great friend Divine. I mean, that was...
Yes. I mean, but it's just sort of... It's our work takes us everywhere, and then it ends up part of the adventure. And then, I mean, Andrew's portraits and everything, and just seeing things and enjoying doing sketching trips together.
Well, I wanted to ask about that because I know one of the things that you both do when you travel together, I mean, is sketch, and you do watercolours. So what is it about the drawing process that's so integral to both of your practices? And when you travel and draw, is it a case of reworking all of those ideas and translating them and abstracting them across all sorts of different mediums?
When you draw, or Andrew doing his fabulous watercolours, a photograph is a quick, instant thing. It might be something you can refer to, but you don't absorb it in the same way. You don't, when you draw something, you see funny little things in the landscape or things that you don't see when you quickly take a photograph and it's instant. So we went right across Morocco and we were drawing all the sand dunes, and like we'd be at 6 o'clock in the morning, oh, don't miss that sunrise.
I mean, one night, do you remember we were sitting drawing an abandoned castle, I think, in the middle of nowhere in the Atlas Mountains. We haven't thought about where we were going to stay that night. And we were drawing away and the light was going. Eventually some man came by and said, oh, you can sleep on our floor. So we slept on his floor.
So, I mean, you mentioned photographs, but in a way then your drawings and your sketches, and I know you've got lots of sketchbooks.
The drawings
are
the
visual diary, really, for
They're
you.
the visual diary.
Yes.
I mean, my sitting freezing cold drawing Ayers Rock at sunrise in the morning it's not, you do sometimes feel freezing cold, but the result's worth it. You know,
yes.
You've got that for a forever memory.
One of the other things I wanted to ask you about, because obviously the interchange and collaboration has been an incredibly important part of your relationship. And I mean, Andrew, your chandelier is here,
Yes.
and you've done portraits and busts of Zandra. And Zandra, you're wearing Andrew's jewellery.
Oh, yes. It just happens,
Yeah.
sort of something there or something, or that, like the funny one about
Yes.
the portrait of me, you said, I'm going to do your portrait because he was frightened I was going to dye my hair black.
Yes.
Because we thought my boyfriend was a bit conservative, and he said, I better capture that while it's still like
The pink.
Did you dye it black?
And later on, I went and saw it. Sorry, I saw the Klimt portrait. That was the latest portrait, wasn't it?
Oh, the Klimt one that you've got.
Yes, which is the Klimt, huge 8-foot portrait of Sandra. It's all based on the most expensive painting in the world that was in New York, which I saw. I brought the brochure back to London with me, showed it to Sandra, and she said, oh, I need another portrait. I said, righty-ho. And I went and did it. But I used Sandra in that portrait because I always feel portraiture is very much about two people, not just one. And so Sandra screen printed a lot of the glass, which I then painted, which I set into the work.
Oh, you had that when you did the lamps that there.
Those are the lamps. That's an extension of that.
Print those, and
yes.
then we'll do something with that.
But portraiture is quite personal for you. I mean, it tends to be your family and friends that you focus on.
I suppose it does, sometimes they're icons. If I admire people or I find them extraordinary, then I will. But mostly it is family and friends and people I admire.
And self-portraiture?
Self-portraiture, I have done one from, I did a huge one, 8 foot tall or something, from the Holi festival from Vrindavan in India, which is it's a colour festival. It's basically the end of winter, the beginning of summer, and it's complete chaos. Everything is opposites. So the men dress as women, and the women beat the men, and chaos.
And they throw colour everywhere.
And you throw colour everywhere, and you can be very naughty. It's a lovely naughty festival.
I mean, when I look at, talking about colour, when I look at your respective practices, colour, glamour, flamboyance and fantasy are all sort of, words that spring to mind. I mean, do you think glamour is still important? One of your contemporaries, the fashion designer Bill Gibbs, said, reality is so horrific these days that only escapism makes it bearable at times. So the more glamour the world can provide, the better people will like it. Do you think that still holds? Do you think that's true, particularly now, or still holds true?
I think so. I think dressing up in itself makes you feel much better. Because you've bothered, you've put that bit of effort into something. So at least you're presenting that to the world in some form or other. Whether the rest of the world like it or not isn't isn't necessarily something that you can answer for.
But then it is creating fantasy, which,
Yeah.
I mean, we all live here and we think everything is real, but perhaps it's not at all. I mean, perhaps we're all living an illusion. So I think Bill's quote is wonderful. I'd never heard that before.
Yeah, it is. It's a lovely.
Yes,
I mean, although he said it many, many years ago, I mean, it still resonates.
I'm sure
now.
it is.
It's nice to know he's not forgotten.
No.
And what about colour? I mean, colour is. I mean, despite the trend towards minimalism in the 90s, you remain steadfast and true to colour. Why is it so powerful for you both?
Sandra?
Well, I was once given the challenge of wearing black for a week, and I felt so completely drained and boring. I mean, how many black brooches of Andrew's would I wear either, you know? Colour don't see the dirt any quicker than you'd see it on black. I mean, I think it's a matter of choice, really.
Don't you think, I mean, colour is the essence of the world. You look out the world, the trees, the sky, it's all colour.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Black is the night, I
You
suppose.
know, when it was grey and rainy, we didn't like it quite so much.
No. But I think it's part of nature. You know, you think of all those flowers, those colours, and the animals we see in the world. I mean, it's just, we're part of that. We are part of that. So colour is part of us. I think this introduction of black is rather artificial and...
Yeah. I mean, you know, I like my rainbow penthouse because
Exactly.
it's rainbow and it looks very happy.
Yes.
And it feels happy. You know, you don't feel sad in it.
Yes, it's obviously a great emotional kind of investment. How much is sort of your practices around challenging convention? I mean, Andrew, you've described yourself as belonging to a unique school of English eccentrics, and Sandra, you've been described as a notorious figurehead of UK fashion. Is it about being away from the centre? I mean, has this been a conscious driving force for you both?
I mean, what I would say is for me, my own group of friends, which isn't necessarily fashion, is what keeps me going, because fashion goes up and down. 1 minute you're in, 1 minute you're out. And I don't feel that we're not really chameleons, we're ourselves. And so I work to get new ideas, but that doesn't mean it's always what the public would necessarily want. You just have to hope that you're true to yourself and you follow those ideas, and in the end, if you believe in it enough, someone will want it.
Sandra, I was listening to a BBC interview of you with Roy Plomley, and I think it was
That's an old one.
It was in 1983, and there's this lovely moment where he describes your style as admirable. But in fact, when you set up your label in 1969, you were told your designs were too extreme. So do you see your work as deliberately subversive, or is it, as you were sort of talking about earlier, is it really still about artistic experimentation? And I guess I was thinking about your conceptual chic collection from 1977.
Oh, right. I think really I came from a different direction than at that time. Because really, I'm a textile designer. I was trained to do textile prints, and I couldn't find anyone to buy my prints. So what I ended up doing was almost being self-taught with a little bit of help to make dresses, because people would say, "You're a textile designer, you can't do dresses." And I'd think, well, the people at college didn't look that much brighter than I was. Why can't I make dresses? So
Yes.
It was really that also took me to America, where they weren't going to say, "Why is a textile designer doing dresses?" So they've been based round mainly the story that comes from the print and everything originally. And so and then, as I say, most of my friends are not in the fashion world, so it's meant that I can have my influences from different directions.
One of the things I also wanted to ask you about was legacy. Australian designers Jenny Key and Linda Jackson of Flamingo Park have just had a major retrospective at Sydney's Powerhouse Museum. But both of them have spoken about being inspired by London's new wave of designers in the 1970s, such as Ozzie Clark and you, Zandra.
Oh, I know, because I know that Jenny talked about coming to my midnight show at the Roundhouse and what an influence it was. And she was a great friend of Andrew's as well.
In terms of legacy, you've also both established your own museums. But what I wanted to ask was around the architecture of those spaces, because Zandra, you worked with the Mexican architect Richard Legorreta, and Andrew, you worked with your partner Michael Davis. How, I mean, obviously we're in this extraordinary apartment of yours, but how important is environment and space for you both?
Well, really, through my friendship with Michael Davis as well, we tried to discuss here in London what would manage to pass the building rights and regulations, but be spectacular. And we'd both had trips to Mexico because Andrew had a wonderful exhibition of his sculptures, and I'd seen the work of Ricardo Legorreta, and so I flew him to London first class on my American airline mileage ticket, and talked and said, the Shard hadn't been built. This is an up-and-coming area. Would you consent to design a museum for me? And he said yes, immediately.
And it was his first building in the UK?
In Europe.
In Europe.
Was it his last as well? Did he?
There's one minor one in Spain, I believe, but
Spain.
This is already got a preservation order, so it's quite wonderful. And it's bright orange and pink on the outside. Yes. What more could I ask?
And in terms of your museum in Wales, because that's also a studio space as well, or is it?
No, it has a shed next to it, which is my studio. But no, Michael himself, it's actually converted to squash courts.
Right.
And of course it has a beautiful floor, wooden floor, and huge walls. So it's actually very suitable for the work. Not big enough, but...
well, you can always expand into your hotel.
And it was in the 80s, and I had no money. But I did have a dream of opening a museum. Because my work was about joy, I wanted somewhere where people could just come and experience it any time. Because so often with exhibitions, it's, oh, I'm so sorry I missed it, but it was only on for 3 weeks or 3 months. But this way, it'll be on even after I've gone. In fact, I am building a little cosmic egg, which I'm going to have my ashes put in. So that will be in the museum.
Hopefully not for a very
not for a while yet.
But you yourself trained as an architect, and
yes.
You told me a lovely story about how you came to choose architecture as a profession.
Oh yes, I was a window cleaner. And my brother Peter, who was at art school in Oxford, was walking along with an architectural student or friend, and he called up to me. I was at the top of the ladder, and he said, what are you going to do? I said, oh, I don't know. I was about to leave school. And he said, why don't you do architecture? I said, good idea.
So that was it.
So that was it. And I did 6 years training to be an architect.
Establishing a museum, as you both said, is sort of about sharing your visions and your legacy. But Zandra, you've taken it a step further. Throughout lockdown, you've been working on the Zandra Rhodes archives. Can you tell us about that?
Well, Andrew, of course,
the foundation.
His museum is totally with his work.
Yeah.
Here, this museum is really representing British fashion and textile designers, who I think are the Cinderellas of the business, because people don't appreciate how much a textile design contributes to the garment. So being shut down, I suddenly then thought, well, I'm now going to create the Zandra Rhodes Foundation, because I've saved one of every collection I've got. So downstairs in this building, on my part of it, the Zandra Rhodes bit, I've got about 86 boxes of clothes that have to be fully sorted through. And then the Rainbow Penthouse is going to become my vision, with mannequins in it, plus beautiful works of Andrew and Dougie that I've collected. So it will be part of my fashion vision to the nation will be on the top floor, and then they'll be able to experience my library and my sketchbooks and things like that.
And you're also thinking about donating some of your archives to museums across the world. And we talked about possibly Australia.
Well, I definitely have already been in touch a little with the Powerhouse, because one of the wonderful collections that I still adore is my Ayers Rock collection, with all the spinifex grass and all the things like that. So I do want some of my original work to be in Australia, which was the birth of all of that.
So before we ended up, we've been living through a fairly extraordinary year. And Zandra, you described the 70s as a revolutionary decade. So I wondered, Andrew, how you think we might best describe the decade that we've just been through.
Well, the end of of course, the beginning of the 20s, suddenly the whole world has changed. And I think capitalism was on the rise, with everything that goes with it, and we were just devouring the earth. And we are part of the earth, and we need to look after the earth, and we're not. We haven't been, but hopefully we'll be. But that's really, in essence, is that we are part of this world, and we need to treasure it and look after it. And doing so, we will look after ourselves as well.
And finally, Zandra, you've just celebrated being 80 years young. Can I say that?
Happy birthday.
I'm glad you said 80 years young.
In a 1986 interview, you said that as you got older, you would like to be seen as a formidable grand old lady like Diana Vreeland. Andrew, has she succeeded?
Very much so. Oh, yes. She's well, you have, yes.
Oh.
But
Diana Vreeland was something that you'd go in the room and her personality was so powerful that you didn't even remember what she looked like. It was just so incredible, I think the bit of saying the age, I don't want that bit. It's just, I'm a person, and whether I live forever or not is neither here nor there. I can live forever in my sculpture that you've done of me, so
yes, that
would be all right.
Well, I would like to thank you both very much for your time today.
Oh, delighted.
Thank you.
It's lovely to be here, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm Dr. Jean Sherman, founder and director of Sky, the Sherman Centre for Culture and Ideas. You've been watching a Sky Cinephile Hub episode. This episode has been proudly supported by the Sky Cinephile Circle of private patrons. We are grateful for their generous assistance alongside a number of commercial, educational, cultural and government organisations, including the City of Sydney. More episodes are available for you to enjoy at sky.org.au. Thank you for joining us.